Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thanks again for stopping by. I do appreciate it. I trust the week has gone well. I find myself spinning at the end of a week, and it's been very wet here in Nairobi, rather autumnal, and it's the kind of weather that I like actually in Nairobi. I thoroughly enjoyed myself yesterday at the RMA Kenya Jaguar Land Rover cocktail at the Capital Club, and had a great time. Basically speaking to the members there about Jaguar, and I had a great deal of fun doing that. Of course, RMA put me in a car over one weekend and sent me to South Africa, and I promptly bought one because I'd never been so excited in my life. And then I'm very careful about driving it around. And last night I sort of put my foot down and please don't arrest me because there are some new laws. On that note, you can listen to Hands Up by Ottawa, which is what I thought of when I was thinking about not being arrested. And I did drive it rather fast, I must admit, on my way home, and felt like a stealth bomber flying under the radar, creeping up on people and then just flying by. I had a very nice time. It's a wonderful car, it really is. And I still feel quite guilty about indulging myself. I've done the interview. I've uploaded the interview with Dennis McCory, the interview I did after the Mindspeak session. Asked him quite a few different questions, actually, more about the financials, where he saw the company being. If you haven't had a look at that, do have a look at it. And of course, the entire session is also uploaded on YouTube. And if you care to check, you can find the link through Rich Wrap-Ups. Home thoughts, going back to Thomas Pynchon, who's so dense. He's like James Joyce and Ulysses. You wade through 15 pages. You can't really wade through more, and the books are so long. And I sit and think, oh my God, But it's extremely enriching, interesting, surreal. I don't know how to describe it. But let me read you one bit from V. Perhaps history this century thought eigenvalue is rippled with gathers in its fabric, such that if we are situated as stencils seem to be at the bottom of a fold, it's impossible to determine warp, woof, or pattern anywhere else. By virtue, however, of existing in one gather, it is assumed there are others compartmented off into sinuous cycles, each of which had come to assume greater importance than the weave itself and destroy any continuity. Thus it is that we are charmed by the funny-looking automobiles of the 30s, the curious fashions of the 20s, the particular moral habits of our grandparents. We produce and attend musical comedies about them, and are conned into a false memory, a phony nostalgia about what they were. We are accordingly lost to any sense of continuous tradition. Perhaps if we lived on a crest, things would be different. We could at least see. Fairmont, Mount Kenya posted a wonderful photograph of a sunset, and it really was very beautiful. And then I like this photograph of the Milky Way sparkling over Second Beach in Olympic Wilderness. Second Beach is one of the most popular beaches in the Olympics. It is home to a labyrinth of tide pools, as well as bald and golden eagles and seals. And the two places I've enjoyed seeing the Milky Way most were at Lake Elementaita, and I'll put up a photograph of Michette and Hannah on horseback along the lake shore. It's an extraordinary place. It's beautiful. The colors are extraordinary. And in Lamu, where we stayed at a place called Paponi's, where the owner was a guy called Lars, who's now passed away. And one night we sat on his balcony with the sea coming in. And as you looked up, you'd see this entire Milky Way. And he was regaling me with his stories and pumping me full of a drink of his called an Old Pal. And in fact, in both times, in both places, I woke up Hannah, and we both marveled at the universe. Political reflections, Poroshenko at the NATO table. I'll put up a photograph that first came to me via email and made me think again of those photographs of Obama during the Africa summit when I went back to Barthes, and Barthes says, one of the marks of our world is perhaps this reversal. We live according to a generalized image repertoire. I think that generalized image repertoire, the Poroshenko image, was a very powerful image. And Barthes, writing some time ago, said, consider the United States where everything is transformed into images. Only images exist and are produced and are consumed. I'll put up a photograph of the NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen on his way to the NATO Wales Summit that I found from their Flickr page. And he said on his Twitter handle, NATO Summit UK is a critical summit at a critical time. Today and tomorrow we will forge a stronger NATO for a more complex, chaotic world. We call on Russia to pull back its troops from Ukraine to stop the flow of arms, fighters and funds to the separatists, he also said. And let me take you back to the main point. I think it's really NATO expansion towards the border of Russia, which is the key factor to understanding the current crisis in Ukraine and sometimes skipped over. More specifically, and this was a point in that article, is a fear that a resurgent Russia in combination with China would form the basis by which the power wielded by the Anglo-American world will be finally broken. And I think, picking on Putin, because it was a fight that was taken to Putin, it wasn't a fight that Putin took to Ukraine, I think was a mistake. I think you needed Russia in order to get your back as you sort of tried to pin down China with your pivot. And here you've turned both of them into allies overnight. Ukraine crisis leaders talk about peace, but in Mariupol, Luhansk and Donetsk, the reality looks more like war. This is the Independent. There was artillery shelling, tank fire, gun battles, retreating soldiers, and reports of warships putting out to sea. Amid all the strife, there were also signs of a truce as Ukraine's bitter civil war moved towards a defining phase. Even as the leaders talked about possible peace, there were violent developments taking place. Firefights were followed by an advance by the rebels towards Mariupol, a port and a vital strategic point, and government forces retreated from positions around Luhansk, which they had laid siege to for weeks. Abandoned checkpoints. The rapid movements on the ground could be attempts to maximize gain before a ceasefire, following the talks at the Belarus capital Minsk, but a failure to achieve a deal leaves the military balance in favor of the rebels, and this is the key point. Kiev and the West have repeatedly accused the Kremlin of backing them with weapons and in their recent advance Russian troops. The capture of Mariupol would complete a land corridor to Crimea and leave Russia in control of the Azov Sea coastline. Why should we stop now? We are winning. Leonid Golovkin, 23, was genuinely puzzled. They thought they were going to crush us, and that was a sucker punch, I think. Now those in Kiev just want to get time to get more weapons. This is what Poroshenko is doing now, trying to get weapons and mercenaries from NATO. Even if they agree something, it's not going to last. Too much blood has been shed. People will want revenge. And as I wrote not too long ago, it's a shadow zone, and there's plenty of propaganda being thrown by both sides. And the new normal is, as I said, a very arrhythmic world, and the shadow zone that is eastern Ukraine is a clear example of that. And we have had a gradual expansion of shadow zones all across the world, in point of fact. By Wednesday morning, the screen grab of Sokolov on his knees in that deadly desert was everywhere. His name was the trendiest term on Google. More than 1 million people had searched for it. They looked and looked. This is a piece in the New Yorker. And I'll put up a photograph of the Islamic State, from a photograph from a still from a video purporting to show the beheading of Stephen Sokolov. And it took me back, in a way, there's a circularity in all of this if you consider it to Gaddafi. When I wrote about Gaddafi's body in a freezer, what's the message? I'm left thinking this dead Gaddafi business is one powerful message. And if the dead Gaddafi business is a powerful message, surely then the dead Sotlov image is a powerful image. It's kind of very similar, circular. And today Marshall McLuhan's prediction in the Gutenberg galaxy, that was in 1962 by the way, the new electronic interdependence recreates the world in the image of a global village, has come to pass. The image of a bloodied Gaddafi, then of a dead Gaddafi in a meat locker, have flashed around the world via the mobile, YouTube and Twitter, very similar to Sotlov. And I thought to myself, then, who's in charge of the messaging? Through the fog of real-time and raw footage, I note a very powerful message. And you know what that message is by now. But the point I'm making is of the similarity, the verisimilitude between the two situations. One of the defining bifurcations of the future will be the conflict between information masters and information victims. And that comes from a US Army a War College Quarterly, 1997, the US officer assigned to the Deputy Chief of Staff of Intelligence, charged with defining the future of warfare, wrote, one of the defining bifurcations of the future will be the conflict between information masters and information victims. Now, this is the interesting bit. This information warfare will not be couched in the rationale of geopolitics, the author suggests, but will be spawned like any Hollywood drama out of raw emotions. Hatred, jealousy, greed, emotions rather than strategy will set the terms of the information warfare struggles. And something like Sotlov's beheading is exactly how it's, is the response, the counter-reaction. And then that took me back to Pynchon again, in Against the Day, which is the book I'm currently reading, and I must be at page 300, but I think I've read like 1,000 pages because it's so dense and so complex and elusive, and it's very interesting. Explosion without an objective, declared Miles Blundell, is politics in its purest form. Now, Islamist militias in Libya have reportedly taken control of 11 commercial aircraft from Tripoli International Airport in Libya, sparking fears of a 9/11 style terror attack. And that is as it is, I suppose. Euro 129.32, huge move. Below 130 for the first time since July 2013. I'll come to what's been going on. Dollar index 83.86, big move higher. Going higher still, in my opinion. Japanese yen, 105.32, touched 105.71, which was the weakest level since October 2008. The Swissy, 0.9325. The pound has been pounded by the Scottish situation. 163.10. Aussie holding in there, 0.9341. India rupee as well, 60.43. South Korean won, softer, 10.2461. Rial holding in there, 10.2424. Egyptian pound 7.1518, and the South African rand softer at 10.7338. The Bloomberg dollar gauge climbed 0.7% yesterday, steepest one-day gain since March. The euro sank 1.8% yesterday to the weakest level since July 10, 2013. The ECB announced they will purchase a broad portfolio of simple and transparent securities and euro-denominated covered bonds. This is Draghi yesterday in Frankfurt. The dollar has rallied 1.1% this week. The euro has fallen 0.7%, and the yen has weakened 0.3%. I'll put up a 1-month chart of the dollar index, and you can see it's really accelerated higher. As I wrote, it was sort of premonitory. And 25th of August, sometimes you just feel it and you can sense it more than anything else. And I wrote on the 25th of August, the dollar has been punching higher. If things tip big, the dollar might soar. And, I was referring to this new level of arrhythmia, or what I think Rasmussen gave it a different, complex and chaotic, he called it. and I was saying, this new level of arrhythmia, friction, and a kind of unsettling ambiguity. How are we to navigate the financial markets? And I said, you see, in the old days, these conditions would have created a flight into the dollar. And I was saying, interestingly, the dollar has been punching higher. This is the last week in August. If things tip big, I said, the dollar might soar. And it's been a pretty dramatic move. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the euro dollar. That's broken down through 130. Touched 129.20 lower since July 2013, down 1.5% this week. 8-week losing streak is the longest since the currency began trading in 1999. Policymakers unexpectedly cut interest rates. We knew it was coming, but the act of it coming was the issue. The benchmark and deposit rates fell 10 basis points to 0.05%. and minus 0.2%. So you're on negative interest rate if you're keeping money at the ECB. Draghi signaled at least 700 billion euros of fresh aid for the economy, pledging to significantly steer the ECB's balance sheet back towards 2.7 trillion euros from 2 trillion euros right now. The rate cut marks the bottom line for conventional monetary policy. And obviously now beginning an experiment with quantitative easing here. Inflation is at 0.3% as well. I wrote about Mario. I've got a high regard for him, I think, and I called him the Euro's savior in September 2012. Have a look at that. And I was in Milan 113 days ago. I'm going back in a few days, and I was at this conference that Francesca Conforti had organized. Lorenzo Binsmaghi, who was an ECB member, was one of the guests, and we spent a lot of time together. And it was then that he told me that the decision was essentially made for further easing. But since then, it took 113 days, and he made this point to me that decisions can be made, but then the ECB is an unwieldy institution to get your ducks in a row in order to pull the trigger. You can see that in that length of time. An interesting story. Yields driven under 1% on almost half the world's government bonds. 45% of all government bonds yield less than 1%, said the Bank of America. That's just extraordinary. And at this point in the cycle, goodness, these are these are great sales, but timing is everything. Sterling has been pounded. I'll show you a 3-month chart, 163.12. Scotland refers. Dow Jones, S&P, and Nasdaq. I'll put up a 1-month chart, up about 3 or 4% on a 4-week basis. Gold, 1263.63. My target is 1240. I'll put up a 1-month chart. Crude oil, we've been bouncing around down here. Massive retreat, obviously, in the last 4 to 6 weeks. 94.48 last, looking as if it's trying to base out. It goes down, but then it sort of springs back up again. Renamo's Dhlakama, who's been hiding in the bush, has returned to Maputo as of yesterday and the political process, and that's a powerful and bullish signal in the noise from Mozambique, in point of fact. Qatar National Bank, QSC, the largest Arab bank, acquired a 12.5% stake in Echo Bank Transnational, marking its first acquisition in sub-Saharan Africa. Bought 1.77 billion ordinary shares and 732.3 million preferred shares, according to a statement. A 12.5% stake in Echo Bank is valued at about $230 million US. South African all shares up 12.592% this year and has popped up above 52,000 for the first time since July the 16th and is now within centimeters of a record closing high. Dollar rand a little bit softer, 10.73.75 last. Egyptian pound back at that 715 level. The Egyptian stock market up another 0.24%, up a huge 42.228% so far this year. As I said in January, if the equity markets had a vote, President El-Sisi would have got an even bigger majority. He would have got one of those impossible to believe votes of 99.8%. I said that in January, and look at how the equity markets performed. I'll put up a photograph of the president in his office. Nigeria all share is at 3-month lows. It's minus 0.7621% year to date. Boko Haram crisis, according to the BBC, bodies litter Nigeria's Bama town. A Nigerian town 2 days after it was seized by Boko Haram. Boko Haram fighters were patrolling the streets of Bama, preventing people from burying the dead. The US is saying Boko Haram may attack the Nigerian city of Maiduguri. Boko Haram has shown that it can operate not only in the northeast but in Kano, Abuja and elsewhere. This is Greenfield. The frequency and scope of Boko Haram's terror attacks have grown more acute and constitute a serious threat to this country's overall security. If you haven't seen that video from The Independent of Abu Bakr Shekau taunting President Jonathan with "Bring back our army," a play on "Bring back our girls," that link is also there. You can get a better insight into the man. He taunted President Goodluck Jonathan in April when he said, "I'm in your city," and I wrote, "Or is it cities?" The US is saying they're planning a major border security program in Nigeria. The United States is preparing to launch a major border security program to help Nigeria and its neighbors combat the increasing number and scope of attacks by Islamic extremists. Assistant Secretary of State Linda Thomas-Greenfield told a meeting of US and Nigerian officials in Abuja, "Despite our collective efforts, the situation on the ground is worsening. The frequency and scope of Boko Haram's terror attacks have grown more acute and constitute a serious threat to this country's overall security," she said. "This is a sober reality check for all of us. We are past time for denial and pride." The government denied that Boko Haram overran Bama, the second largest city in Borno State, but Thomas Greenfield said, "We are very troubled by the apparent capture of Bama and the prospects for an attack on and in Maiduguri." The United States has flown unarmed drones to spy in parts of north and east Nigeria in a joint effort to try and save more than 200 schoolgirls kidnapped by the extremists in April. The hard power lever that the US owns is a decisive one, and one that is increasingly embedded. This is another example of it being embedded, and allows the US to tilt the African pitch. Bob Diamond is in talks to buy a stake in Nigeria's Union Bank. This is Reporters. Coming back to Ebola, WHO says that given these multiple high-risk exposure opportunities, the outbreak of Ebola virus disease in Port Harcourt has the potential to grow larger and spread faster than the one in Lagos. A man had contact with the ill visitor, later evaded his surveillance, travelled to the oil hub of Port Harcourt, where he triggered a second cluster of cases. So we've got to watch out for that. And of course, so far they've managed to keep Lagos under control. Lagos has a GDP of $100 billion, which is approximately 10 times the entire combined GDP of Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone. If you didn't get a chance, do have a look at that inside story I did with Laura Kyle about Ebola. I thank her for taking my thoughts. And as I said previously, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics, and I don't think we've got to that stage in the graph, and I think the Ebola virus continues to gain velocity. Put up a photograph of Sierra Leone's burial team members wearing protective clothing next to a coffin at the Médecins Sans Frontières facility in Kailahun. Wall Street Journal is looking at the economic toll on Africa. Flow of goods across many African countries, from Congolese copper crossing the Botswana border to used cars driven into Nigeria, is seizing up on fears that traders could be carrying or catch the killer virus. Trade slowdown comes on top of a drop in tourism and the suspension of commercial flights to West African cities as well as Nairobi. The upshot, an accelerating continental economy, has hit a massive speed bump. The IMF projected sub-Saharan Africa would grow by 5.4% this year, but is now warning that Ebola is set to badly hit growth rates in the countries directly affected. Ebola's economic impact has become so severe that the IMF is now warning that stricken countries could need emergency assistance. What is already clear at this stage is that growth is likely to slow sharply, said Jerry Rice, whom I know. Significant financing needs are likely to rise. The World Bank and the IMF said recently that the epidemic would shave a full percentage point off Guinea's growth rate, slowing it to 3.5%. But I think it's going to slow it much more dramatically. And as I said, on the 18th of August, economic forecasting across vast swathes of sub-Saharan Africa now carries a very high component of beta. Things go exponential, non-linear, then we're in a big problem. Ghana Stock Exchange up 2.61% this year. It's at January 20th, 2014 lows. Economic growth is likely to slow to 3.9% in 2014 in Angola from an estimated 6.8% last year. This is the IMF again. Interesting piece in foreign policy, back to the trenches after years of pursuing peace and stability. Kenya's political factions are returning to bare-knuckle politics, the writer writes. Kenya's opposition coalition announced that it will venture to the country's coast to seek out signatures for a growing petition demanding a referendum to amend the country's constitution. It's not clear what the referendum will entail exactly. The organised promise it will. It's very, very murky. Promise it will cover everything from electoral and land reform to instituting an inclusive political process to improving security and fighting corruption. Just a year ago, Kenyans seemed resigned to the idea that no price was too high to pay for peace, chastened by the 2007-2008 post-election violence. But if this referendum and the mounting opposition movement backing it are an indication, that consensus has since been broken. The return to bare-knuckle politics, complete with open discussion of ethnic exclusion in government, emotionally charged mass rallies, has raised political temperatures to a level not seen since 2007. Kenyatta's administration has reacted with restraint to the opposition's rallies. Threats to ban them through the Inspector General of Police have not materialised. A sensible decision. As the attack, then talking about Peketoni, as the attacks became more and more frequent, the sense of insecurity in Kenya started to have tangible effects. Tourism industry is on its deathbed. Talking about Al-Shabaab, the Westgate attack. This is the point the writer's making. Outnumbered in Parliament, opposition prefers to use people power to pressure the government. That's right. It's non-constitutional in my view. In the sense that when you go through the constitutional channels, my point is there isn't a clear agenda. The opposition, I think, has managed an incredible recovery. It was not too long ago that the men in black shredded the democratic bona fides of the opposition. However, memories are short. Kenya has been at the eye of the storm on the security side, with asymmetric attacks spiking off the charts at that point. However, at some point, the opposition have to move forward on an agenda. And for now, a fair question to ask is, where is the signal in this noise? Or better still, where is the beef? France Telecom is in advanced talks to sell its majority stake in Telkom Kenya, which is 30% owned by the government. Kenya shilling was last trading at 88.68, which is an extraordinarily good performance when you consider what happened overnight. And I called it the Teflon shilling, borrowing a phrase from Cedric Mohammed on the 14th of July. And I, for one, am not prepared to buy into this 90 plus, 95 plus forecast. Nairobi All Share snapped an 8-session winning streak to edge lower. It remains 16.728% higher for the year and just marginally off a record. It hit 8 records in a row before yesterday. NSE 20s at more than 6-year highs, and that's gone above 5,150. 5,450 is I think, a fair objective before year-end, and we might surpass that. Britam closed at a record yesterday. It's up 81.51% now, but on a PE now of 19.643. It's looking expensive. It's been squeezed higher, and they've done a good job of it. Kenya Orchards up an extraordinary 566.66% was the other share that hit a record high. Centum closed at a record that it had previously reached last week, and now it's pushed on into a new record. Bulls, we're running with the bulls in Nairobi. For now, little corrections will be shallow. I think we're still going higher. I sincerely wish you a fabulous weekend, and I appreciate the fact that you come and listen. Thank you.